The house was burning. Flames swallowed the roof like a beast finally free. Smoke curled out of shattered windows, dancing in the cold night air. Neighbors stood helpless on the street, their faces pale in the firelight. Sirens howled in the distance. And in the middle of it all, one man stood still. He was barefoot, shirtless, covered in ash. A small American flag hung loosely from his left hand, burnt at the edges. His name was Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole, a retired Marine. And in the space of 20 minutes, the fire had taken everything he had left in this world. The firefighters pulled up, barking orders, unrolling hoses, but Daniel didn't move. His eyes were locked on the front door of the burning house, something carved into the wood years ago. No one else noticed it. No one else even looked. But Daniel did. Even with smoke stinging his eyes and heat burning his skin, he stared at that door as if it were the last thing holding him together. Just 2 hours earlier, Daniel had been sitting alone at the kitchen table. It was a small, creaky home tucked behind a gas station, with cracked walls and a leaky ceiling. Not much to look at. But it was all he had. He made coffee every night at 9 p.m. It was routine. Military habits don't die easily. Even now, years after deployment, he lined up the sugar, folded the napkin square, and sat with his back straight. The house was silent. The kind of silence that hums in your ears when you've lived alone too long. Framed photos lined the mantel, but the faces were mostly gone, faded, burnt by time. The only photo still clear was of a little girl sitting on his shoulders, her smile wide, one hand holding a marker. That photo sat directly above the fireplace. It had never moved. Outside, kids had passed by earlier. One had laughed. "Hey, is that the haunted vet house? It's the guy who talks to walls?" Daniel had heard them. He always did. But he didn't respond. He never did. The neighbors only knew rumors. They knew he used to be a Marine. They knew he kept to himself. And they all whispered the same thing when he passed. Poor guy, he's just not the same. They weren't wrong. Daniel Cole had buried half his unit in Kandahar. Then he buried his wife 5 years after returning. Then his daughter, his whole world, was taken in a car crash just months after that. Since then, he barely spoke. But every morning, he opened the front door, stared at the inside of it for 10 seconds, then closed it again. It became a strange ritual. What no one knew was that the inside of that door had a message. A message written in permanent black marker, scrawled in a child's handwriting, crooked and messy. My daddy is brave. My daddy is my hero. He never erased it, never painted over it. Even when the wood started to crack and splinter, even when paint peeled from the edges, those words remained. So when the fire started, no one really knows how Daniel didn't panic. He ran to the hallway, tried to grab the photo off the wall, but the heat was too much. Flames exploded behind him. He stumbled back toward the door, and there it was. That writing still there, still untouched. Even as everything else around him turned to smoke. By the time the firefighters reached him, he had already walked out. They tried to hold him back. But Daniel just pointed one last time at the door before the roof collapsed. One young firefighter turned and squinted, and for the first time someone else saw the words. His voice cracked when he read them aloud. My daddy is brave. My daddy is my hero. No one spoke for a long time after that. The fire was finally out. Water still dripped from the blackened remains of what used to be Daniel Cole's home. Steam rose from the rubble. The air was thick with smoke and sadness, so the neighbors had gone inside. Only a few stood in silence, watching as Daniel sat on the curb, head bowed, fingers still holding the burned corner of that little flag. A firefighter walked over slowly, helmet off, boots soaked. He wasn't much older than 20. Sir, I'm real sorry, the young man said gently. Is there someone we can call for you? Daniel didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the place where the front door used to be. The message was gone now, eaten by fire. But in his mind it was still there. My daddy is brave. My daddy is my hero. That's when something strange happened. The firefighter, the same one who'd read the words aloud earlier, sat down beside him. I saw it, he whispered. What she wrote. It was your daughter? Daniel turned his head slightly. A long pause passed before he gave the smallest nod. The young man cleared his throat. My name's Tyler. I joined the fire department because of my dad, too. He wasn't a soldier, but he was the bravest guy I ever knew. Died of cancer 2 years ago." Daniel said nothing, but his shoulders softened just a little. Sometimes silence means someone's listening. Later that night, an officer took Daniel to a shelter across town. He didn't argue. He didn't ask questions. He just followed. The room was small, barely furnished, and cold. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, still covered in smoke and ash, still not speaking. He stared at his empty hands, at the spot where the flag had been. That flag, like everything else, was gone now. But something inside him began to shift. Back at the scene, firefighters worked through the night, clearing debris. Tyler, the young firefighter, kept walking past the same spot, the place where the door had stood. Eventually, he picked through the ashes and found a chunk of charred wood. It was nothing special at first until he turned it over. There, barely visible through the smoke damage, were the last few letters from the marker message, burnt at the edges, but still holding on. ... Hero. He froze. Gently, carefully, he wrapped the wood in a towel and placed it in his backpack. The next morning, local reporters showed up. Fires in this part of town weren't news, but a neighbor had posted a photo online the night before, blurry shot of Daniel standing in front of the fire, clutching the flag, with the words on the door barely visible behind him. The post went viral. Thousands of people began asking questions. Who is this Marine? What happened to him? Is that real writing on the door? Where's his family? News vans started circling. But Daniel wasn't home anymore. He was sitting alone in the shelter, staring at the wall. That afternoon, someone knocked gently on the shelter door. It was Tyler. In his hands, he held the burnt piece of wood. "I thought maybe you'd want this back," he said, eyes full of quiet respect. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then something happened that no one had seen in years. He cried, just one tear running through the ash still clinging to his cheek. He took the piece of wood, held it like glass, and whispered something no one could hear. That night, Daniel finally spoke again. Not to a reporter, not to a crowd, but to the wall beside his bed. "I couldn't save the house," he said quietly, "but I saved the words, and that was enough. For now." 3 days had passed since the fire. Daniel hadn't spoken much. He ate in silence, slept with the burnt wood beside his pillow. Each morning he would stare out the shelter window with tired, distant eyes. But on the 4th day, something changed. A boy came in, not more than 12. Small frame, nervous steps. He held his mother's hand like it was the only safe thing in the world. Daniel noticed them right away. The shelter was quiet, but the boy was crying softly. His mother spoke to the volunteer in a hushed voice, her hands shaking as she filled out a form. "House fire," the staff whispered. "Everything gone." Daniel stood up. Without saying a word, he walked over to the volunteer station, opened the small bag he had next to him, one of the few things donated to him that week, and pulled out a brand new winter coat. It was 2 sizes too small for him, still had the tag. He had planned to return it, but he handed it to the boy instead. No speech, no explanation. The boy stopped crying, looked up, then took the coat in both arms like it was treasure. "Thank you," he whispered. Daniel gave the smallest nod, then returned to his seat. It wasn't much, just a coat. But it was his first act of compassion since the fire. The first time anyone had seen him choose kindness over silence. Later that day, the shelter staff told him that his story was spreading. The photo from the fire, the one where he stood barefoot with the flag, and the message on the door behind him had been picked up by several national news sites. They were calling him the Door Marine. Some said he was a symbol of strength. Others just wanted to know more. TV hosts began debating what the message meant, but Daniel didn't care about any of that. He didn't want fame. He didn't want a camera in his face. He just wanted to hold on to the last words his daughter ever wrote. That night, as he lay in bed, Tyler came to visit again. "Did you know someone started a GoFundMe for you?" he asked, smiling. "People want to rebuild your house." Daniel looked up, tired but calm. "I don't need a house," he said quietly. "I need that door." Tyler chuckled. "Well, the door's gone, man. Fire took it." Daniel didn't reply. Gently ran his fingers over the charred wooden piece that still said, "Hero." That's when Tyler had an idea. "What if we don't rebuild the house?" he said, "but we build something better?" The next day, Tyler went public. He posted a video. No music, no background effects, just his voice. A few days ago, I met a Marine who lost everything in a fire. But the only thing he wanted to save was the writing on his front door. His daughter had written it years ago. My daddy is brave. My daddy is my hero. He didn't ask for help. I'm asking for him. Let's honor his daughter's words by proving they were true. The video exploded online. People started donating. Veterans groups reached out. Teachers wrote letters. One entire high school in another state held a fundraiser called Be Somebody's Hero Day, all in Daniel's name. Back at the shelter, Daniel was still quiet, but a small spark had returned to his eyes. He started helping other families who came in, fixing chairs, carrying bags, handing out food without being asked. The staff noticed. One whispered, "He's like a soldier again, taking care of his people." But Daniel didn't see it that way. He was just doing what his daughter would have wanted. That night, he sat outside under the stars. The air was cold, but in his hands was that piece of wood. He stared at it for a long time, then said softly, "I didn't lose everything." And with that, he stood up, walked back into the shelter, and signed his name next to the volunteer list. After the video went viral, things began to change around Daniel Cole, the once quiet neighborhood that barely noticed. His existence now buzzed with attention and even controversy. Every day brought new visitors and conflicting voices. Reporters camped outside the shelter, demanding answers. Some local politicians began to offer help with grand promises, only to be met with Daniel's silent refusal. He kept his focus on the small piece of charred wood, the memory of his daughter's words, and the few acts of kindness he still managed to give. The very people who once ignored him now crowded his space. At the shelter, volunteers argued over the best way to honor him, whether to rebuild his house or to set up a memorial. The plan to build a community center in his name gained popularity, but not everyone agreed. A group of some local residents, angry at the sudden attention, began to question the authenticity of his past. Rumors spread quickly on social media. They asked questions like, was he really a Marine? And is the door's message real, or just a publicity stunt? In heated online discussions, the simple truth was twisted. Some called him the Door Marine, while others just mocked the idea that a few scrawled words could mean so much.
Ow.
Daniel tried his best to ignore the gossip. He believed that the only truth he needed was the one burned on that door. Yet as the comments grew harsher, the pressure to defend his story became overwhelming. His close friend Tyler felt the weight of it all. One afternoon, as the shelter was busy with people coming in and out, Tyler found Daniel sitting by himself on a cold bench outside. He sat down beside him, trying to offer comfort. "Daniel, they're starting to question everything," Tyler said softly, eyes on the gathering crowd of curious onlookers. "We need to do something before this turns into something ugly." Daniel simply stared at a sparrow hopping across the pavement. His face was etched with grief and determination. Even though the fire had taken his home, it seemed that the fire of conflict had now been lit in his name, and his heart was burning with a quiet anger he couldn't ignore. News crews, sensing drama, began filming heated interviews. A local talk show host boldly declared on live TV, "Is our patriot's memory being used for political gain, or do we have a real hero on our hands?" These words cut deep into Daniel, fueling the rising conflict. Every question, every accusation, made him remember the loss of his wife and child, a painful reminder of all the parts of him that were once lost. That evening, during a community meeting held in the shelter's cramped hall, voices clashed. Local leaders debated whether to install a statue for Daniel in the newly proposed community center. Some believed that honoring him publicly would bring healing and unity. Others argued that such a public display was not what Daniel wanted. It was too much too soon and exploited his pain. In the back of the room, a small group of cynics whispered doubts. "Maybe he's just trying to get sympathy," one said. Others scoffed. "Heroes don't live in shelters, do they?" The murmurs spread like wildfire. Daniel sat in the center, feeling every word like a physical blow. He had never asked for fame or a monument. He had only wanted to preserve one precious memory of his daughter S. Love the words on that door. Tyler, witnessing the growing tension, stood up. He walked to the podium as the room fell quiet. "Look, I know you all have questions," he said firmly, his voice steady. But Daniel never asked for this spotlight. All he ever wanted was for those words to be remembered, because they remind us that even in our darkest times, there is a hero within each of us. His words helped the room settle for a moment, but the debate was far from over. Even as the meeting ended, the conflict in the community was building. Some people left with hope in their hearts, ready to support Daniel's quiet journey. Others left with suspicion, their doubts fueling a quiet rebellion against what they considered manipulation. Later that night, Daniel sat alone in his temporary room at the shelter. He stared at the burnt piece of wood again, the word hero barely visible through the remnants of the fire. Tears welled up in his eyes, not just for his family, but for the loss of peace in his life. He whispered to the silence, "I never wanted all this trouble. I just wanted to keep her words safe." The rising conflict was now not just outside in the community, but inside him as well, between the need to be understood and the desire to remain true to himself. This clash of hope and anger, respect and doubt, was a battle that Daniel would have to face every day. And so, as the night deepened and the murmurs of the town faded into an uneasy silence, Daniel held on to the only thing that defined him, a promise of quiet strength hidden in a few written words. The next morning, the shelter's door creaked open early. A cold wind blew through the hallway. Daniel, already awake as always, sat by the window with a cup of plain coffee in his hand. But something was different. A woman stood at the entrance. Dressed in a long gray coat, she looked unsure, one hand clutching her purse, the other holding a faded manila folder. She glanced around nervously before locking eyes with the shelter coordinator. Her voice was soft but firm. "I'm looking for Daniel Cole." Daniel turned when he heard his name. Not many people used it these days. Most just called him Sir, Marine, or whispered behind his back. The woman stepped forward and introduced herself. "My name is Julia Brent. I work at the National Archives. I think I have something that belongs to you." She sat across from him in the small visitor room, carefully opening the folder. Inside were two things. A black and white photo of a young Marine kneeling beside a Humvee, his face covered in dirt and sweat, but unmistakably Daniel. A crumpled letter, written on military stationery. The envelope was torn, but the words on the top were still clear. "To my daughter, if I don't make it home." Daniel's hands trembled. He reached out slowly, almost afraid to touch it. "This was found last week during a digital scan project," Julia explained. "It had never been delivered. It was sealed inside a military crate that was being restored for a museum exhibit. When your story went viral, your name triggered a match in our veteran records. We traced this letter to you." Daniel opened the paper with shaking fingers. He remembered writing it. He remembered sitting on that bunk overseas, fearing the worst. He wrote it after a firefight that left 3 of his closest friends dead. It was the first and only letter he ever wrote to his daughter from the battlefield. The words were simple. "Sweetheart, if you're reading this, I didn't make it back. But I want you to know something. Every time I thought I couldn't keep going, I thought of your smile. You made me brave. If anyone ever asks who your daddy was, I hope you tell them this. He tried his best to come home to me." Daniel couldn't breathe. Tears slipped down his face. Silent and unstoppable. The burned message on the door. "My daddy is brave. My daddy is my hero." Now it was clear she had never seen the letter, but somehow she'd written the exact same thing back to him, without ever knowing his words. She had answered them in her own handwriting on the inside of the front door. Father and daughter. Connected through time, through war, through fire. Julia placed a second item in front of him, a flash drive. "This also includes your unit's audio logs and a voice message. Now we believe it's your daughter." Daniel hesitated, then plugged it into the old donated laptop the shelter kept for job seekers. He clicked play. Her voice filled the room. "Hi, Daddy. Mommy said you might not be able to hear this right now, but I wanted to say something in case you come back. I wrote on the door. Did you see it? I love you. I miss you. I'm brave now too, like you." Daniel covered his mouth, shoulders shaking. No one else was in the room, but if they had been, they would have seen something rare. A Marine, battle-worn and broken by years of silence, finally let the grief fall out of him. Not with noise, not with anger, but with raw, quiet tears. That night, Tyler came by again. He found Daniel sitting outside with the burnt piece of the door in one hand and the letter in the other. "I thought I lost her," Daniel whispered, "but she answered me." Ever reading a word? Just like that, the story changed. No longer just about fire and loss. It was now about a father's love carried across time, a daughter's reply written in ash, but remembered forever. That night, the shelter fell quiet early. The volunteers had all gone home. Only a few guests remained, bundled in donated blankets, their breathing soft in the dim light. But Daniel couldn't sleep. The letter and the flash drive sat on the table beside him. The piece of burnt wood rested on his lap, stared at it, his thumb slowly tracing the faded word. Hero. A knock came on the door. Not loud, just respectful. It was Tyler again, holding 2 mugs of tea. "I thought you might still be up," he said gently. Daniel nodded and waved him in. They sat for a long time without talking. Soft hum of the shelter's heating unit filled the space between them. Then Daniel spoke, low, steady, and distant. "She was 6 when I left, just starting 1st grade. She had this habit of drawing stars on her hands with a marker. Said it made her brave at school." He paused. "She never cried when I left, not once. Just smiled and said, 'Come back soon, Daddy. I'm saving you a spot at the dinner table.'" Tyler nodded slowly, listening. Daniel continued. "When I was deployed, I wrote letters I never sent, took photos I never mailed. I always thought I'd have time to give them to her later." His voice cracked a little now. "But when I came home, everything felt different. My wife, she tried, but I wasn't the same. Nightmares, guilt, silence. It became too much for her." He looked down. "She got sick. Real sick. Cancer. By the time I opened up again, it was too late. She was gone." A heavy pause hung in the air. Tyler's eyes softened. "And your daughter?" Daniel swallowed. "She stayed with me for a while. We used to eat cereal on the floor, because I never unpacked the dining table. One day she took a black marker and started writing things all over the inside of the front door." He smiled faintly. "I got mad at first. Told her not to write on the walls. She looked up at me, her big eyes wide, and said, 'But you're my hero. Doesn't it belong there?'" His voice broke. She was only 8. Tyler sat back, speechless. Daniel continued, tears welling in his eyes. "A few months later, a drunk driver ran a red light, hit the passenger side. She was gone before they even got her to the hospital." The room fell into a silence so deep it felt sacred. "I never took the words off the door," Daniel whispered. "Even when paint chipped, even when I moved furniture, those words stayed." For the first time, Tyler fully understood what the door had meant. It wasn't just a message. It was the only part of her Daniel had left. It was the answer to a father's unspoken question. Did I do enough? And her reply, in marker on a wooden door, had been there the whole time, "You're my hero." Tyler reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something, a single black marker. "I thought maybe, one day, when we rebuild, you might want to write it back." Daniel stared at the marker for a long time. Then he nodded once, slowly. The next morning, Daniel sat alone on the shelter's back steps. Sunlight broke through the gray clouds for the first time in days. He took out the letter from the National Archives and gently folded it, placing it in his jacket pocket close to his chest. He no longer looked like a man haunted by shadows. He looked like a man holding on to something worth carrying. Inside, Tyler spoke to one of the volunteers. "Did you hear? The mayor's office is officially offering land for the new center. They want to name it Hero's Door." The volunteer smiled. "Fitting, don't you think?" Tyler nodded. "Get down." But but then added softly, "No. Fitting would be if they built it quiet. No speeches, no plaques, just one door." With those words, outside, Daniel finally stood, the burnt wood still in his hand. And as he looked up at the sky for the first time in years, he whispered, "I'm still your dad, baby girl. And I'm still trying to be brave." By the end of the week, the shelter's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Calls came in from veterans groups, fire departments, schools of families who had lost loved ones in the military. They weren't asking for interviews or headlines. They just wanted to say one thing: please tell him, thank you. A quiet wave of respect was building. The same town that once whispered about that strange veteran with the burnt house now looked at him with something else in their eyes. Guilt, yes, but also gratitude. Outside the shelter, someone had taped a simple white sheet of paper to the gate. In black marker, a child's handwriting read, "You're my hero too." No name, no drawing, just those words. Daniel saw it during his morning walk. He stood there for a full minute. No one knew what he was thinking, but for the first time, he smiled, just a little. The next day, the mayor's office made it official. The empty lot near Daniel's burned home would be turned into a small public center built, not to glorify war, but to honor quiet strength. At the front of the building, there would be only one decoration, a wooden door, replica style, same color, same grain, and across the center in permanent marker, "My daddy is brave. My daddy is my hero." No golden letters, no marble, no loud speeches. Just her words restored for the world to see. When Daniel was told, he didn't say much, simply nodded and said, "Make sure no one ever erases it." Meanwhile, the letter from the National Archives, along with the recovered audio recording of his daughter, was played at a veterans tribute event. It wasn't televised, but someone uploaded it to a quiet corner of the internet. The video showed no face, just a black screen and the voice of a little girl saying, "Hi, Daddy. I'm brave now, too." It spread like wildfire. Not with millions of views, but with millions of hearts. In schools, in fire stations, in folded hands across breakfast tables. At a local middle school, a teacher printed out the message and taped it to her whiteboard. Underneath, she wrote, "What does it mean to be brave without being loud?" A student raised their hand and said, "It means being like the Marine with the door." One night, Daniel was walking back to the shelter when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. A woman approached, holding her son's hand. The boy was missing one arm. Sleeves were neatly tucked, and a badge reading "Bravery Camp 2023" was pinned to his chest. "Excuse me," she said. "My son wanted to meet you." Daniel knelt slowly. The boy reached out his good hand and whispered, "I read your daughter's message. I lost my dad last year. But I think he'd be proud I met you." Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, he simply placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, nodded deeply, and stood tall. That moment would be talked about for weeks. No cameras, no reporters. Just a Marine, a boy, and a message that didn't need explaining. At last, the shelter received a new name. Didn't name it after Daniel. They called it the Doorway. Inside, just above the front entrance, they mounted the original burnt piece of wood. The one Daniel had carried in silence. The faded word, "Hero," still barely visible. Beneath it, a small plaque, not fancy, just wood read. This piece survived fire. So did the message it carried. Daniel now spent his mornings quietly volunteering, serving breakfast, mopping floors, fixing broken hinges on cots. One day someone asked him, "Don't you want to speak at the dedication ceremony next week? Maybe share your story?" Daniel just looked at them gently and replied, "I already did." He tapped his chest, where the letter from his deployment now rested behind a worn photo of his daughter. Then he walked back inside, the door closing softly behind him. The sun rose early on the day of the dedication. It was a cool morning, quiet, almost too quiet. No fanfare, no marching bands. No speeches scheduled, just a gathering of people who came because they felt something. The new community center stood calmly where Daniel's house once stood. It wasn't big, it wasn't shiny. It didn't have a sign with gold lettering. But it had one thing that no other building in town had: a door, stained brown, solid oak, right in the front. And across the middle, in a child's handwriting, carved, Gently and painted by hand, "My daddy is brave. My daddy is my hero." No one spoke as they approached it. They just stood. Daniel was the last to arrive. He wore a clean but simple jacket. His boots were worn at the edges. His beard was trimmed now, but his eyes still carried the weight of war, the warmth of healing. Tyler met him at the corner. He didn't say anything, just handed him something. A black marker. Daniel took it, then slowly walked up to the door. The crowd stepped back, clearing a silent path. He raised the marker, paused, and beneath the original words in small, steady handwriting, he added, "I'm still trying to be brave too." No one clapped, no one cheered. Instead, a firefighter removed his helmet and bowed his head. A young boy in a wheelchair raised a small salute. Ah! A mother wiped her eyes with a tissue and pulled her daughter closer. And from the back of the crowd, someone began to hum the tune of Amazing Grace. Not loud. Just enough. Daniel stepped back, and that was it. He didn't speak. He didn't wave. He just placed one hand on the door, closed his eyes for a moment, and whispered, "Thank you, baby girl." Then he turned and walked down the path, not away from something, but toward something new. Later that day, the mayor arrived, late due to a scheduling mix-up. He was prepared with a speech, reporters, and a podium. But when he got there, it was all over. The people had already come and gone. The dedication had already happened with no microphones. No headlines, no stage. Just respect. When asked by a journalist how the event went, the shelter director said simply, "No one said a word." But I've never heard so much being felt. Back at the doorway shelter, things returned to normal. Daniel went back to volunteering. Mornings were spent serving breakfast, afternoons fixing broken windows, evenings wiping down tables. He never asked for credit, never asked for thanks. But every now and then, someone would stop him and ask, "Are you the one from the door?" Daniel would smile small, and say, "No, that was her." One night as he was locking up, a young teenage girl approached. She looked nervous. "I just wanted to tell you, my dad's in the army. He's not home right now, but I saw your story, and it made me feel like he's still here somehow." Daniel didn't know what to say at first, but then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small ribbon from his own service uniform, handed it to her. "He's still with you," he said, "just like she's still with me?" The girl hugged him, not hard, just enough, and then she walked away holding that ribbon close to her chest. Daniel stood outside the door, staring up at the stars. The building behind him glowed softly with warm lights. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something was better. Something felt right. No flag ceremonies. No news conferences. Just a man, a daughter's handwriting, and a door that refused to let her voice be forgotten. Years passed. The town changed in small ways. New stores opened. New families moved in, but one thing never changed. The door. It stood quietly at the entrance of the community center, weathered by sun, rain, and time. Children ran past it. Veterans touched it gently on their way in. Visitors paused, read the words, and left thinking about someone they loved. "My daddy is brave. Daddy is my hero." I'm still trying to be brave too. No golden plaque, no guards. Just the quiet power of a child's words and the story behind them. Daniel never became a celebrity. He never wanted to be. Stayed in the same town, working quietly at the doorway shelter. Over time, he helped build a small garden behind it. He started a group for struggling veterans, where no one had to speak if they didn't want to. He became the man people called when something needed fixing, not just broken chairs or windows, but broken spirits. And still, every morning, he'd walk by that door. He'd stop for a moment, place a hand over the word brave, close his eyes. Can't keep going. One afternoon, a reporter came from a national paper. She'd been assigned to write about forgotten heroes. She asked for an interview. Daniel said no. But when she asked if she could visit the door, he said, "You don't need me to talk." She already did. She stood there for almost an hour. When she returned to her office, she didn't write a dramatic headline. She wrote, "The hero who said nothing and meant everything." The article went viral, not because it shouted, but because it whispered. Later that year on Veterans Day, the town held a small ceremony. They didn't plan speeches. Instead, they invited people to come forward and leave a note if they had something they never got to say to a father. A mother, a brother, a sister. The base of the door filled with folded pieces of paper. Some were soaked from tears. Some had drawings. Some just had a single word: thanks. Daniel stood at the back, unseen by most. But he saw everything, and he smiled. One winter evening, as snow fell softly on the sidewalk, Daniel sat by the fire in his small cottage behind the shelter. The place had been built by volunteers after the center opened. It was simple. Just one bedroom, a table, a lamp, and a photo frame. In that frame, his daughter's old drawing, Star. And beneath it, the words, "I made this so you don't forget how bright you are." He held it gently, like it could break. Then he placed it beside the piece of burnt wood still with the word hero barely visible. He leaned back, eyes watery, and whispered, "I didn't forget. Not even once." When Daniel passed away a few years later, there was no parade, no marble statue, just a town that paused. The day after his passing, someone lit a candle and placed it by the door, then another, then another. By nightfall, the sidewalk was glowing. People stood silently. No one spoke. A little boy reached up and touched the word brave, then looked at his father and asked, was he really a hero? The father knelt down and said, he was the kind of hero who never needed to say he was one. Today, that center still stands. The door still holds the message. And every year on the day of the fire, people gather not to mourn, but to remember. Not just Daniel, but what he taught them, that true courage isn't loud, that love doesn't die in flames, that even if everything is lost, the right words can still survive. Above the door, now carved in small letters, is one final line. He never asked for thanks, but now a whole town whispers his name.